I grew up in a Jewish suburb north of Chicago called Highland Park, predominantly Jewish community. And when I was 18, I wanted to go to college and I wanted to get far away. And I went to the Claremont colleges. Then I came up to go to graduate school at Stanford in educational psychology. I came out as a lesbian at about the same time, 1974, 1975, and found myself then on a kind of different track. I dropped out of Stanford. Officially I took leave. I hated it. It was horrible. And they didn't want me to do the work that I was interested in around sex differences and teacher behavior. And I ended up teaching an undergraduate course on sexism in education for 3 years at San Francisco State. I was mostly a political / community organizer. I started being an organizer when I was in high school, and I continued through college and graduate school and post. And after I stopped teaching, I really was doing work to pay my rent so that I could be a community organizer. In '87, I got asked to move to Washington, D.C. to organize the 1987 March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. And what's significant about that is it's in the middle of the AIDS crisis with a Republican in the White House who had never uttered the word AIDS. No programs, no money, no nothing. We were fighting for everything. I think what I remember the most is how afraid people were about this. They didn't know what it meant. And then all of a sudden, as a health issue, it was overwhelming. So it kind of just goes like this, and then it reaches a critical point where they had to create new hospital wings, and they had to deal with education of healthcare workers who were afraid to touch anybody. That was why it was such a big deal when I brought Jesse Jackson to the hospice in the Castro. People were scared to be in the same room. Even though they may have intellectually known that it was about exchange of bodily fluids of somehow, but they were still, could you get it if somebody coughed on you? There was no education except so the education, for example, here in San Francisco, came from a grassroots kind of place. We had to educate ourselves because nothing was coming from the sources you would normally go to for health education. And I also was responsible for getting people to the march, but I also was responsible for making connections to the broader civil rights community. And we did this, we got 650,000 people to this march without iPhones, without computers, without databases. I'd never worked on a national march before. I'd never spent any time in Washington. Sometimes you just do it and things happen. So take risks, get out of your comfort zone. There's a phrase that has always really spoken to me that's called, you make the path by walking. And it's always that phrase I've known. I don't know where it came from originally, but it's always had great meaning for me because you don't know until you go down there. But you can't know ahead of time how things are going to turn out. And if you want to be sure, then you never try. You never start, because you can't be sure until you start going down that path. And I think that just in some way it kind of captures the personal decision making that I've made. Why I've jumped into things without any real basis for jumping into it.
without any pride, say, I've never done that before. I don't know how to do that. And
that really changed the trajectory of my work life because for the first time I was actually getting paid to do political work. I ended up working on a local political campaign connected to then Mayor of San Francisco, Art Agnos. And he offered me a job in his administration in the mayor's office of community development, which I had no idea what it was, but I had a couple good friends and mentors who did and said, that'd be a great place for you. You work on every issue in every low income neighborhood in San Francisco. And because even though I'd organized the March on Washington, I had a kind of broader anti-racist frame to my politics, anti-poverty. It was not just about lesbian and gay rights. And I ended up working for 3 mayors for 12 years.
I'm proud of a lot of the work that I did when I worked for the city. The Mayor's Office of Community Development funded a number of neighborhood centers in Potrero Hill and Visitation Valley and Chinatown, in the Tenderloin, in the Mission, and all of these organizations provided a lot of different kind of programs and services to their community. But they also were a touchstone for the community. I mean, if something happened, if there was something went to and looked to the neighborhood center as a place of safety and support, there was no longer funding for neighborhood centers as neighborhood centers. And I thought that I thought that was wrong, that there needed to be funding for neighborhood centers, but that they needed help to be able to kind of shift their own perspective on themselves and how to talk about what the work that they did, not just as a compilation of programs, but as a hub, as a safe place, as a community center. I invited the executive directors of 6 different neighborhood centers to come meet with me to be able to say, here's what neighborhood centers mean, as well as some of them were really strong in housing, others are really strong in social services, some were really good at community organizing. They all had different, that they also could be in a learning environment with each other. It's great when you have this vision of something and then you actually are in a position to they made it happen, but I gave them the opportunity to make it happen. And my instinct, and I followed my heart, my instincts, that this would be a really good thing for the organizations and for the city. And I guess it has been. So for me, being a feminist made me open to thinking about and being less scared of maybe I was a lesbian, and then really provided the foundation for everything.
That's awesome.
Being a feminist is like so I've worked on infant mortality, and I've worked on domestic violence, and I've worked on pay equity, and lesbians just were like one part of women who had particular discrimination against, right? But I was really always concerned about the whole package, and women in power, particularly for me, political power. It's not that I believe in feminism. I am a feminist. It's really it's such an important part of my identity, and just as important as being Jewish and being now 71 years old. I mean, it's just part of who I am. And then my wife got sick. She got diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Told she might have 3 to 6 months to live. And I didn't want to miss a minute, so I stepped back from my work. But she did die in July 2020. And I'd lost my mom about a year earlier. And I'd lost my dad in 1988, and I'd lost good friends to both cancer and to AIDS. But this was different. This was, our lives were intertwined. And it changes everything. It changed everything. Cheryl called me to tell me that the doctor had said they found a tumor in her pancreas. Didn't know what kind yet. And I literally sank to the floor and said, for the first time in my life, I want a rabbi. This bullshit about God only gives you as much as you can handle is just, it's not true. I can't handle all this. I can't have the three of the most important women in my life all having some form of pancreatic cancer. It was unreal. And she's still around, mostly laughing at me for doing stupid shit, but she's still around. The essence of our relationship was total. She made me laugh. From the moment I met her, she made me laugh. And I think the hardest thing about letting go of her is not thinking I'll ever meet somebody who will make me laugh that way again. But in the in mainstream U.S. culture, you get 3 days bereavement leave and you're supposed to go back to work, and folks think you're over it. And grief is the flip side of love. If you love deeply, you grieve deeply. And so it's got its own beauty, and it has its own path, not all of which is easy. And I've believed in talking about it and sharing it and allowing myself to experience it. And I think it's made me a better person.